I think we have a lot of people who are recruiting or hiring, and to some extent, they're doing it based on general ideas of like attributes they would like to have in the organization. I hope this person is punctual. I hope this person is a good communicator. I would want all of those things too, but that's not really being done in the context of a specific goal. And so, what I would say is, what is the goal? What's everything that has to go right to achieve that goal? So now we're talking about an organizational objective.
I'm really excited for this episode because I was actually a little bit brain drained from it because it's so relevant to the recruitment industry. And you might not have joined the dots. Kyle Austin Young has had an illustrious career as a very young leader at 21 years of age. He operated a strategy which he then, I guess, accidentally developed to get himself a really senior role in a corporate business. He then developed a fractional career, and over those years, over that decade, he worked with multiple organisations in their organisational restructure, but saw a common theme when it came to the odds of success and how to ensure we're changing the probability of that success in our goal setting. So this is so relevant to all of you, whether you're just thinking about changing your odds of placing candidates as a recruiter, whether you're a founder who's looking to attract the best talent, because we do dig deep on how this allows you to assess the best people for your business, or if you're secretly looking for a new job and you're trying to understand which company is going to actually achieve its goals and have success. I promise you it's brilliant. Not least, towards the end, we talk around Kyle's 4 hacks for improving your success chances. So without further ado, let's go. This is Lysha Holmes, and I'm your host on the Recruiters Recruitment Podcast. And I am always so excited when we have an international guest who is giving their time to you, our amazing community. And I'm delighted to welcome somebody from wonderful Nashville, Tennessee. I'm trying to think, I don't think we've actually had anyone from your part of the USA before. But without further ado, this is Kyle Austin Young. Welcome to you today, Kyle. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. And wow, the first one from Nashville. I hope I
Think
represent
so.
us well.
I think so. I'm trying to think. I will have to probably possibly go through our archive. There's probably some avid listener who's spent the last 6 seasons knowing exactly where everyone's based. But I'm so thrilled that you can join us today. And actually, this is second time lucky because the first time we had a little bit of a mismatch on the clocks going back in the UK. So apologies again.
No
So,
problem.
Kyle, tell us little bit about who you are and what you do and what we're going to talk about today.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm a business strategy consultant, and I came into that line of work a little bit organically and a little bit, I guess you could say, unexpectedly. I went through a couple of layoffs early in my career, both from pretty visible leadership positions. And after the second one, I was so frustrated. The first time my wife and I just bought our first home at the time. The second time we were in the process of adopting our daughter, which is pretty famously expensive. And we ended up in the situation where twice I had to sit down and have a conversation and say, I've lost another leadership position pretty unexpectedly. So I wanted to do something a little bit different. I had 4 job offers the day after that second job loss. I know that's uncommon. I'm very thankful for it, but it was still a difficult decision because I wanted to do what I could to develop a life where I would have a little bit more stability. And I ultimately was fortunate to get some advice from a couple of friends who both essentially said the same thing, which was, why don't you take fractional roles with these 4 companies and then get some diversification and ultimately start consulting so you won't
Brilliant.
have to keep starting over, on this regular basis, which had become my habit to some extent. So I took that advice. That was over a decade ago. Very thankful for it. Was able to have a great consulting career that's come out of that. But one of the things that was different about consulting versus full-time work was I was obviously involved in a lot of different diverse projects at the same time.
Yeah.
And I brought with me that mentality from my full-time work of realizing that my performance in and of itself wasn't enough to guarantee my job security because in both of those organizations I'd done very well. In the first organization, I remember the CFO had given me a performance review. It was a grade that he'd only given one other time in his entire tenure with the company. I was doing well, but the companies were struggling financially, and so that's
Right.
what led to layoffs. So this time I wanted to do what I could to, protect myself, and so ultimately I started to take on the mindset of what can I do, regardless of what my job description is, to make this project succeed, to make this organization succeed? And that's what drew me into this idea of odds of success and trying to find ways to understand them, change them. I did that for many years, had great success, was fortunate to write for sites like Harvard Business Review, Forbes, Psychology Today, the Boston Globe, many others, and then ultimately was given the privilege of writing the book, which is where I sort of unpacked the full framework. So that's how we got here.
I absolutely love that testimony. And, kudos to you for, I guess, having good people around you that gave you sage advice.
Yes.
I mean, we didn't use the word fractional 10 years ago. I think we used to use the word interim. But I think that that was such a brilliant strategy, whether it was by design or by accident, to go and do that. And actually, if you think that if you'd have taken, if you had the sliding door moment, if you'd have taken one of those jobs, where would you be sat now? Would you have continuously just been on this perpetual chain? Can I just ask you what industry, what sectors was it one sector that you'd always operated within in leadership or different ones?
The first organization that I worked with was I was the product development director at a nonprofit health organization. And so I've worked with pretty much every space since then. Now I kind of try to explain myself as I'm typically working with a subject matter expert who wants to either advance an important conversation or monetize their expertise.
Okay.
So people who are, master gardeners or organizational psychologists or PhD nutritionists or even, a biotech CEO who wants to change the conversation around cancer. It's typically somebody who knows a lot about something, but they aren't really sure how to build a business around it. So I've been involved in a lot of different projects that wouldn't necessarily fit that. I mean, everything from a virtual reality company that wanted to teach people how to learn new languages in these VR spaces. I've been involved in pretty much everything, but I tend to kind of explain my bread and butter as working with subject matter experts who are trying to monetize what they know.
No, you did what you have done now. Gosh, what's the most obscure project you've worked on then, without maybe giving anything away commercially sensitive? What's the most obscure? And that virtual reality one sounds pretty cool.
Goodness gracious, I've worked with, homesteaders who are teaching people how to preserve foods. That would be something that was pretty niche. I remember I worked with the owners of a bed and breakfast in a coastal town in the United States that had 12 competitors, and they were trying to figure out how to differentiate themselves, in a town where they were one of a dozen options when people came there to stay. There have been some pretty opera singers,
Oh,
Pilates
wow.
instructors, yeah,
Cool.
award-winning
Really?
chefs. I've done a little bit of everything.
And do you get like preferential treatment of all these products and services afterwards? Like, did you get to stay in the B&B? Did the opera singer get to perform for you? That's what I want to know.
It has been really helpful. I've gotten to learn so much from these different people, and so, if I'm working with a nutritionist, I'm picking up a few tips. If I'm working with a
Cool.
psychologist, I'm picking up a few tips. So I've been very fortunate. In one case, I actually started and sold a business for a significant amount of money. It was a side project, but it went very well, and it was largely with the skills that I learned from just one of the clients I was working with. So that's the nice thing about consulting is you learn a lot along the way, and then you know something that you can then offer as a service to future clients. So it's a pretty
Quid
virtuous
pro,
cycle.
I can't say it, quid pro quo in a
There
way.
you go.
Love that. So you've almost, I guess, plagiarized a little bit, but I love that you've created this. And then, so the book came
I'm not gonna agree to the word plagiarism on the podcast, but I've learned a lot. And I'm very thankful for the people I've gotten to work with.
I'm just pulling your leg. It's okay. So your book has obviously created this opportunity. So tell us a little bit around, without obviously going revealing the whole book, because we want people to go out and buy the book and order it on Amazon, etc. What does the book entail? Who's it for?
Well, the premise of my book is that every goal that you're pursuing has two hidden numbers attached to it. There's your probability of success and your probability of failure. But I think most people don't really acknowledge that in their lives. They assume that their odds are unknowable, unchangeable, and kind of irrelevant. And so I wrote this book to help people understand how likely they are to accomplish goals that they're pursuing, but then more than that, to help them change those odds. So if you're open to it, I'll give you an example and maybe we can unpack it a little bit.
Yes, please. I'd love you to.
So let's take the example of, let's say that you're training to run a marathon. I ran a half marathon recently. That was fun. I don't know if I have a full marathon in me, but let's say that you do, and you're training to run a marathon. You hire a running coach, and she tells you that there's three things you're going to have to do to be ready on race day. For this period of time between now until the race, you're going to have to eat, sleep, and train the way that she tells you to. So in this goal, there's three things that have to go right. You have to eat, sleep, and train according to these different regimens that she's going to create. And if you do that, she's 100% positive you're going to be ready on race day. I mean, I guess barring something really bizarre like an earthquake or, something really terrible happens. Otherwise, you're going to be ready to go. So what I would do if I were in that situation is I would create something called a success diagram. I would make a little map from left to right of the things that have to go right for me to get from where I am to where I want to be. So in this case, these steps aren't linear. I'm going to do all three of them concurrently, but I would still write, I need to eat the way I'm supposed to, sleep the way I'm supposed to, train the way I'm supposed to. So this is how we can understand our odds of success. Our odds of success are ultimately the odds of everything that has to go right multiplied together. I know that sentence sounds a little bizarre, but let me kind of show you what I mean. Let's just make up the numbers that, let's say we think it's 70% across the board. We ask ourselves, how likely do I think I am to be able to stick with this diet for this period of time? I think it's about 70% chance I'll stick with it. Okay, how likely do we think we are to be able to train according to these specifications? So we do the same thing with the sleep schedule as well. So it's 70%, 70%, 70%. This is where a lot of people fall into a thinking trap called averaging. If we feel good about the individual steps required to achieve a goal, we feel good about our odds of achieving the goal as a whole. But that's not actually how it works. We can't average, we have to multiply. And if we multiply zero point 0.7 times zero point 0.7 times zero point 0.7, what we learned is there's actually only a 34% chance that we're going to be ready on race day. We will probably not accomplish the goal of successfully running a
Right.
marathon. Even though we feel good about each of these steps individually, there's enough uncertainty among the three of them that we expect to miss it on at least one of those three steps and not be ready to go when it's time to run this marathon. And I think this is something that explains a lot of the dysfunction and disappointment that we see in our world. We see people setting these New Year's resolutions, knowing that most of them don't end up hitting them. We see people who are trying to start businesses and supposedly 9 out of 10 businesses fail, or we know that it's said that such a big percentage of mergers and acquisitions fail to create any kind of lasting shareholder value. Why is that? Well, in goals where a lot of things have to go right, if the odds of each of those things aren't very, very high, then you probably have a predicted failure. Now, I don't say that to discourage people. My book is ultimately about how you change your odds of success, which I imagine we'll get into. But that's at least the premise of how this works and how we can start to get a sense of what goals we might be, most likely to achieve and which goals maybe we need to wait on.
I love the analogy because the reality is I will never run a marathon, but congratulations to you on doing the half. Let's stick with that analogy because it's one that everyone can access and imagine whether they would do it or not.
Sure.
So you've just said there, how do you, and we're not giving away all the secrets of the book, but if I was in that position where I guess it's subjectively what you're saying there is I think I'm 70% ready food wise, like I've been, nourishing my body. 70% of my sleep is great sleep. I feel rested. I feel like I'm refreshed, ready to go. And 70% of it is the actual being able to, building up my capacity, compound effect of running further and further. So, how do I change my odds if you're then saying, mathematically speaking, I've got less than a third chance of.
Slightly over a third, but yeah, very, very close to a third. That's exactly right. So, how do you change your odds of success? Well, I think we can understand our odds of success similar to the way that we've traditionally understood matter. Just this idea that matter can't be created or destroyed, but it can be transferred and rearranged. So, what I mean by that is let's say that I'm flipping a coin and I call heads. If I
Yeah,
do that, there's a 50% chance I'm going to win and a 50% chance I'm going to lose.
yeah,
Why is there a 50% chance that I'll lose? Well, it's because it might land on tails.
yeah,
So in real life, the potential outcomes aren't necessarily as obvious as heads and tails, but I think that we can understand to some extent what the potential outcomes are, and we can recognize that the thing that weighs down our odds of success is our odds of failure. There's
yeah,
those two numbers all the time. So let's take the idea of sticking with a sleep schedule, and
yeah,
we're concerned that maybe we're not going to hit it. What are some things that might happen instead of what we want? What are the potential bad outcomes? Well, I have some young kids who sometimes will come into my room at night and they want to wake me up and do whatever the case may be. So that can certainly be a disruption. That's a tough disruption, but is there any way we can use our creativity to try to address that? Well, if this goal were really, really important, if it was, very very important that I run a marathon successfully, then I might try to make a deal with my spouse and say, I need to sleep in another room for the next, few weeks as I get ready for this marathon because I have to sleep. My running coach says if I don't sleep, I'm not going to be able to accomplish this goal, and I've put a lot of work into this. So that might be an example of a creative solution. If I am, struggling to go to bed at an hour that will ultimately allow me to get the amount of sleep that I need, then, there might need to be a new nighttime routine. There might need to be a new dinner time. There might need to be some adjustments to the schedule that allow me to stick with this. And the same thing could be said as we look at the other different requirements. In order for me to stick to this training regimen, what are some of the bad outcomes that could derail that? Inclement weather. Maybe there's in the part of the country where I live, we just had something called an ice storm. I don't know if you've ever had an ice storm, but it's pretty remarkable. The ice sticks to the trees and the ground, and it kind of looks like
oh,
a frozen kingdom. But then all the trees branches break, and everybody loses power, and it
oh my
goes from
God,
very
how dramatic.
yeah, it's this very beautiful, apocalyptic, dangerous thing. And we had that recently, and I couldn't run while there was ice on the road. So what could I do during that time? Well, maybe I need to have a treadmill in my house for a period
Yeah,
of time. Maybe I need to find some alternative exercises.
yeah,
So ultimately, when we take the time to create a success diagram, graph out what has to go right for us to get what we want, identify the things that could go wrong, we realize that the odds of success that we want are currently hiding in those bad outcomes. And
yeah.
if we can use our creativity to take the risk out of the bad outcomes, the good outcomes get better. And by the end of it, if there aren't really any risks left, or we've done a lot to minimize it, we can do the math again and find that our odds have dramatically improved.
improved maybe even 90%, in which case 0.9 times 0.9 times 0.9.
It's something like 72%. I would need to look, but it's in the ballpark of that,
So and
which
that's
still is not a guaranteed success, but
it's
it's
not
boy, it's a lot
guaranteed,
better.
but it's more likely. I'm really, actually, when you're saying it, it's almost too simple. But actually, how many people, and I want, if you're listening now, well, you are listening now, stop and think about where you've created this, I guess, this barrier by not coming up with a simple solution. And I think it's really applicable to so many scenarios as a recruitment business owner in the day to day of what we do in terms of matching up candidates to clients.
Sure.
I think it's a really simple strategy. So it's breaking it down, looking at where the odds of failure are, and then what can we do to combat that failure? What action can we take to minimize that failure? And actually doing the action. So I that was really effective.
I think so. And for me, the other thing that makes it so powerful is you get really clear on what the goal is. And I think that's actually why a lot of people struggle is they aren't super clear on what the goal is, much less what would be required to achieve it. And so in the book, I actually tell the story of how I got the role of department product department director at this health organization. I was 21 years old. I just graduated from college. I had no business at all getting a job like that. I was up against people in their 50s and 60s. I was managing people with PhDs and master's degrees. I got that job and I tell the story of it, but I'll flip it a little bit for this context, which is to say, I think we have a lot of people who are recruiting or hiring, and to some extent, they're doing it based on just kind of these general ideas of like attributes they would like to have in the organization. I hope this person is punctual. I hope this person is has integrity. I hope this person, is a good communicator. I would want all of those things too, but that's not really being done in the context of a specific goal. And so what I would say is, especially when it comes to who I need to hire, but also which candidate I need to hire, I give an example in the book in the decision-making chapter of what is the goal? What's everything that has to go right to achieve that goal? So now we're talking about an organizational objective. We are trying to, let's say, grow our social media presence. In order for that to happen, here are the things that are going to have to go right. Here are the things that could go wrong in the context of our organization's circumstances. Maybe we're in an industry that is very polarizing, or maybe we're starting from scratch, or maybe we have a real capacity to make great video content. We want to lean into that. We build that success diagram. Now, when we're evaluating candidates, it's not this hypothetical of, who has better communication skills, who has more integrity. All of those things are great. But if we can at least whittle down to the candidates who have those qualities, now we can ask the question, how does this candidate impact the different potential bad outcomes that might happen instead of what I want? If
Really.
I hire candidate A, what risks go down and what risks go up? We're not trying to make this decision in a vacuum anymore. We can stand in front of a whiteboard and say, if I hire candidate A who has, a real track record of growing things from scratch, then this risk of the fact that we have so far to go is going to be a lot smaller. Or if I hire candidate B who has a lot of experience when it comes to working in very polarizing industries, then we're going to reduce some risk there. And then we have the ability to even potentially layer some numbers on it, do some math, and figure out which one we think is more likely to help us accomplish the goal. But that's one of the biggest things that I'm trying to put into people's heads where you're saying, it's so simple. And I agree with you. In some ways, it is so simple. I think the counterintuitive part is we want to do it all mentally, thinking we're going to get it right. But mentally is how we fall into traps like averaging. Mentally is how we end up in a place where we feel good about these individual steps and feel good about the goal when mathematically we shouldn't. So I think it's important to graph this out.
I think so. And I also think it's all about being effective at goal setting and understanding what goal setting even looks like in the first place. And I think as well, there's an overriding sentiment I think I'm gaining from you that we can often be quite subjective. We're not, like you say, looking at the intricacies and how, it is counterintuitive to just think, well, we need someone who's going to add this, but actually, where does that leave us in terms of where the possible failure could be? I think it's really, really interesting. I don't think I've ever interviewed anyone for the podcast who's flipped how we recruit for ourselves and then the job that we do as hiring for our clients in such a way. And I think, in order for those listening who want to achieve, whether it's the sort of the bigger goal, the macro goal, but also all the micro goals, which often is what leads you to the macro goal.
I think that's true. And, one of the great things is if we're graphing out an organizational goal that might take years to accomplish, and we recognize that, maybe it's a step maybe it's 7 steps away that we ultimately get to the place where we, enter into a new space or launch a new product line. Maybe that's a long ways into the future. But now, as we're hiring candidates, if I have, 2 candidates who seem equally qualified and I'm not sure which one to hire, I now also have a context for breaking ties because I can look into the future and say, this is where we're headed. These are the risks that are going to be relevant in 2 years, 3 years. Let's start building the team now that's going to help us be in a position to be successful when that happens. And so ultimately, a success diagram is just about taking all of the information that's out in the world and then consolidating it into something visual that we can have a conversation around. And a lot of the impetus for that, or at least the story I tell that sometimes gets me in a little bit of trouble, is hear me out on this, okay? But
Okay.
I have become pretty resistant over the years to asking for advice. And I know when you hear that, you think, oh, he thinks he knows everything. Why would you not want to ask other people for advice? But I'll tell you a story. One time I had the opportunity to take on this new consulting contract. It was going to pay a lot of money, but it was also going to be working with somebody who was notoriously difficult. It was going to be a really stressful engagement. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it or not. So I went out to my community, some peers and colleagues, and I asked them, what would you do if you were me? Would you take the money or would you avoid the stress? And what was frustrating at first was it was very mixed. About half of them said take the money, about half of them said avoid the stress. And I thought, well, that was useless. Why did I bother? But then I noticed a trend, and the trend was almost to a person, everyone who told me to take the money was somebody who had significantly less money than I did. And everybody told me to avoid the stress was somebody who had more money than I did. And
Right.
what that taught me was that these people were trying to give me honest advice, but they weren't giving me advice in my context. They were giving me advice in their
Yeah.
context. What
Yeah.
they were ultimately hearing, regardless of the words I was saying, was, what would you do if you were me? But they're not
Yes.
me. We have very different circumstances. We have very different goals. So ultimately, that's what a success diagram makes possible is you can then bring somebody into the conversation. And I still get a little resistant to the word advice, but it's not that I think I know everything. I want other people to come in and I want to benefit from their thinking, but I want them to think in my context, not just tell me what they would do if I were magically transported to their context. That doesn't really help me at all. So if we can sit down in front of a sheet of paper, in front of a whiteboard and say, this is my goal. Here's what's going to have to go right. Here's what I identified that could go wrong. Now we can have a really productive conversation. Do you have any tips for how I can take the risk out of some of these bad outcomes? Do you see a more straightforward path to the goal that I want? Can you help with any of these steps that I'm currently up against? Do you think that this is a silly goal to begin with? Have you found, to go back to the other example, that more money isn't the secret to happiness? Maybe I need to question the goal as a whole. There's an opportunity to have that conversation because now we have a shared context. And I think that's what's really important.
Did you take the project?
I did not.
No.
No.
If you'd have asked my opinion, I'd have said no, don't. No
I
money.
wrote a book instead.
You wrote a book. I love that. I mean, look, the fact is that my brain's already about trying to go about 5 steps ahead, and I need to rein it back in. That actually, this process is so applicable to the recruitment industry, not least when it comes to can we could flip this. This isn't just about clients hiring and deciding between candidate A and candidate B. Very often, this can be the candidate themselves choosing between company A and company B. It's
Sure.
it's shared risk, and it's all about considering which one, based on my career goals, which of the two offers that I have, if you were going back to you 10 years ago and you had those four offers, how would I make that decision using this method? So I
Well,
think
if
it's
you want, I'll tell you
really,
about the time that I did it. Would you
yes,
be open
please.
to one more story? When I got that
Of
department,
course.
that department directorship, when I was the product development director of this health organization, I just graduated from college. I'm 21 years old. I was applying for these entry level positions that just weren't that inspiring to me. And then I saw the opportunity to, become a product development director of this health organization. I submitted an application. I don't know how, but I got an interview. So if I were to have made a
I
success
want to know
diagram,
how you got in there.
I
What's
think that there were some things that were a little advantageous to me. The company was a little bit outside of town. I think some people didn't want to make the drive. I also followed up, and I remember when I called in, they had not received my application. I think there were some tech issues that were limiting how many people got through. Because I took the time to talk on the phone, they went into spam, found it, pulled it out. One way or another, I got the interview. So had I made a success diagram, it would have been I need to get an interview and then I need to get an offer. Those would have been the things that had to go right. I already had the interview. Now I just needed the offer. So still, even at this time, I don't remember what this was 15, 17 years ago. I still had a concept that the way that I could improve my odds of things going right was to minimize the odds of things going wrong. So I tried to identify what are the things that could go wrong that would keep me from getting this job. And the first one I thought of was, what if they take one look at me and say, oh, he's too young. There's no way he can do this. They don't even give me a chance to really make my case. So I had to try to find a way to use my creativity to solve that. I wasn't going to lie about my age. I couldn't grow older, before the interview. But what could I
great
do?
hairs? Go and
Well,
He's
Not that far from that. Not that far from that. I grew a beard. And that beard was something that made me look a little bit older. There's nothing unethical about growing a beard. I don't want to hear that. Everybody has the right to grow a beard, but it did make me look considerably older when I had the beard. And so that took a little bit of the edge off. It took some of the risk away from that bad outcome. A second potential bad outcome that I identified was maybe they'd be concerned about my lack of experience, which was fair. I was, a new college graduate. Same thing. I wasn't going to lie about my experience. I couldn't conjure experience out of thin air. But I could try to shape the conversation to be more about the future than the past. So I actually typed up a plan for how I was going to turn this struggling department around. It was so thick that I had to spiral bound it. It was a book. And I took a bunch of copies with me to the interview and I gave them to everybody I talked to. And when they would ask a question about, my resume, I would say, well, here's what I think we need to do to turn this department around. And then I would just go back to the plan. And so we had these really productive conversations about the future of this team instead of having a bunch of conversations where I would have just said, you're right, I'm a recent college graduate. The third and final risk I identified was, would they be concerned that the generational gap would make me an ineffective leader? Would they think that maybe, oh, he's not going to be able to get along with the existing team? Nobody's going to want to take orders from this guy. So the biggest thing I could figure out to try to ingratiate myself to the team was I asked one of them if they had read any books as a department lately, and they told me a few different titles that they'd all read. I went out and read every single one of them. And because of that, I understood their jargon, I knew their goals and their frameworks. I could think the same way they did. And so I could have conversations like I was an existing team member. And I still remember I was in a group interview with some other candidates who were much older, much more experienced than I was. And there was a book out at the time called The Wuffy Factor. I don't think too many people are still reading The Wuffy Factor, but it was a book about how brands generate social capital. And somebody suggested an idea, and I said, I think that's the kind of idea that could help us get a lot of Wuffy. And I remember looking around, and these other candidates, their eyes are bugging out of their head. What on earth did this kid just say? Is this some slang term? What is he talking about? But then I looked at the existing team members, and they were smiling, laughing, nodding along. They knew exactly what I was talking about because we'd read the same book. So I did everything I could to take the risk out of it. And when it was all said and done, I got that job offer. I became the 21-year-old product development director of this health organization. I had that role for a few years. I did very well, got great reviews, got laid off, and that's still part of the story. But because of that, when I was laid off, I was then looking for other managerial roles. I wasn't looking for another entry level position. So I think that whether you're recruiting or whether you're trying to be recruited, when you get really clear on what's the goal, what can go right, what are the things that might go wrong instead of what I want, that's when you open up the opportunity to use your creativity to bring other people into the process, collaborate, delegate, outsource, whatever the case may be, and do everything you can to change your odds of success.
Yeah, I mean, that's an outstanding story of dedication, tenacity, creativity. How long between that interview and then you going back in and doing that assessment day was there for you to read those books? I mean, that's tremendous, Kyle, that you did that. And I've never heard of the Wuffy effect. I might have to go and I'm a real, I like to read. So I've never
Sure,
heard of that. But I love that you did that. It's just, again, it's just putting yourself in that position where it's credibility over your age or experience. You show
sure,
that you've got the willingness to learn. There's a lot. I mean, we could go off on a whole different tangent here about curiosity and, those sorts of behaviors, but I'm really enjoying that. I'm very mindful of the time on this podcast, and I do
sure,
want
sure, sure.
to the 4 hacks. So you've got 4 hacks to improve success. Would you like to share those 4 hacks with us?
Yeah, the way I would say it is I think there are four paths to success, and I don't think most people know that. I think most people think there are two paths to success. You can just be incredibly talented or incredibly well positioned, kind of like a nepo baby, or you can just get incredibly lucky. And that is two paths to success. So there's four reasons people succeed. Some people get lucky despite really bad odds. 9 out of 10 businesses fail. They happen to be the one person who started a business that succeeded. Some people ultimately succeed not by beating the odds, but by playing them. I've interviewed a lot of entrepreneurs who read stats like 9 out of 10 businesses fail, and that's what inspired them to start 10, 20 businesses
Right.
because they recognized that then they wouldn't necessarily have to get lucky. They would kind of act like their own miniature society. They would experience the predicted failures, but they would also experience the predicted successes, and then those successes would change their odds at subsequent goals. An example I give in the book is Apurva Mehta. He founded the grocery delivery company Instacart, and when the pandemic hit, this company was perfectly positioned for massive, massive growth because they were delivering groceries. You hear that story and you think, wow, what a lucky person to be in the right place at the right time. And then you find out that he'd started 20 businesses before that. And all of a sudden, it doesn't seem that miraculous anymore that one
Yeah.
of his businesses was in the right place at the right time. The
Yeah.
third path to success is some people do ultimately succeed because their odds are good. And we have an opportunity to lean into that in our own lives. What I encourage people to do, if there's a bunch of goals that you're thinking about pursuing, make a list of all the goals you might want to pursue, and then reorder the list from the goals you think you're most likely to accomplish to the goals you're least likely to accomplish. And try to see if there's a relationship between some of those high probability goals and the low probability goals. An example in my life, I wanted to write a book. I also wanted to write for the Harvard Business Review. I ultimately decided to write for the Harvard Business Review first, not only because I wanted to accomplish that, but because it made it easier to later get a book deal, right? So if I'd started with the book deal, I would have been doing something much harder at the beginning. I might have failed. I might never have written for HBR coming off of that failure. But when you try to arrange your goals strategically, it can be really helpful. The fourth reason that some people succeed is probability hacking. They start with odds that are bad, like we did with the marathon example, a 34% chance of success. We were expected to fail at that goal. We used our creativity to change the odds. I did look, zero point 0.9 times 0.9 times zero point 0.9 was a 72.9%. So we got a lot
Not
higher. I think
far
I said
off there.
72.
Well done.
Yeah, I did my best. So at the end of that, we had a goal that we did expect to succeed at. And so probability hacking is what I call the fourth path to success. So I know that we're on a time crunch, but I wanted to get those out.
Oh no, I really did. And this has been, I have to say, my brain is exploding because this has been so relevant to this audience. And I think whether you're an active recruiter that's, just wanting to take as much from this as possible so you can make yourself achieve your goals, whether you're using this because you're actually on the market or whether you're actually trying to hire, I think this is directly relevant. So with this episode, we will make sure there is a link for people to purchase the book online. I presume they can buy it online.
Yeah, absolutely. You can get it, Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, Target, the Penguin Random House website,
Right.
wherever books are sold for the most part.
And it would be remiss of me not to allow you to finish with, why should we book a trip to come and see Nashville?
Wow. Well, Nashville is a really beautiful place. It's a very hilly area, lots and lots of trees, and they've just kind of built a city among this just really idyllic landscape, which is cool. And I think it's a place that was really built to make people happy. I really think that's true. This is a state that has a low income tax, and so for that, or has no state income tax, I believe, excuse me. Don't quote me on that, but that's my understanding. And so for that reason, a lot of people who work remotely will choose to live here because there are some tax advantages. And as these very successful people came into town, it led to lots of new development, lots of fun things to do, very family friendly area, and I'm thankful to be here.
Well, there you go. If that's
I
not
hope the Nashville Chamber of Commerce is, about to bring me on as a sponsor. I wasn't prepared to plug Nashville. I think I deserve a check.
You do, and I often ask people who are giving it their time from places in the world that I've never been to, and I just think it's, from a country and Western music point of view, absolutely up there in terms of ideal places to go. Thank you so much for joining us, Kyle. You've been an absolute treasure, and I think this has genuinely been really useful for so many of my audience. So thank you for giving your time today.
Thanks. Enjoyed it.